Breaking this morning, part of Donald Trump's plan to gut the federal workforce is now on pause. A federal judge has temporarily blocked the effort to place thousands of staffers from the U.S. Agency for International Development on leave, that's USAID. The Justice Department tried to justify Trump's gutting of the agency by saying the president, quote, decided there is corruption and fraud. But the judge noted no evidence of such fraud was provided in court. Meantime, crews have already removed USAID signage letter by letter from its headquarters in D.C. You're watching it right there on the screen. The future of the agency's humanitarian efforts are now in limbo. Joining us now is MSNBC political analyst and Republican strategist Susan Del Percio.
Good morning, Susan. I thought that Susan Glasser summed this up so perfectly in her New Yorker piece, noting, if cutting the federal government is what this is all about, then Trump and Musk would not be bothering with tiny USAID, whose estimated budget is less than 1% of the federal government's. The point is not a policy fight, it's an execution. They are killing one agency to terrify 1,000 others. Your thoughts?
Well, that's absolutely the case because it makes headlines. This is an agency which USAID does so much good around the world. But like a lot of government agencies, there are things that you can pick out and pull that thread and say, why are we funding something like this? And I think that's why they chose it to go after it. Plus, it was also something that matches Donald Trump's MO, which is if it's not about Americans, it's not good for us. So he's seeking to isolate us further and use this as really a way, Michael, to bluster and say what he's doing to cut spending. And as we know about Donald Trump, he just needs a fig leaf of something to say that he's done what he promised to do. Again, even when it comes to the deportations, we're not going to see millions and millions of people deported. But if he could get 50 people deported, he'll take credit.
He'll take credit. He will ruin lives in the process, and there are a lot of folks who will enable him as he does it. This headline from CBS News caught my eye. Some GOP officials say Trump administration's federal workers buyout program is illegal. The reason it caught my eye is because no one would go on the record with their name saying what he is doing is illegal. And I wonder what it will take for any of them to say with their full chest what you are trying to pull off at these agencies is illegal. And when they get to the point where they say, what are we doing here? If federal funding is supposed to be routed through Congress and you are just bypassing us, then why do I show up to the Capitol every week?
That's a great question. And for decades that I've been involved in government and politics, even the legislative side, even if it's split government, tends to work together to fight for their powers against the executive branch. It's not uncommon to see that. But what we're seeing now is that the Republicans in the House and Senate are willing to completely fold to Donald Trump's will. They're buying into he has a mandate. He doesn't have a mandate. He has the slimmest majorities possible in the House. He has he doesn't have 60 votes in the Senate, but they are afraid. I don't know how else to say it. They have no political courage. What does it take? Maybe 2026? Maybe. But I'm not putting any stock in that.
You mean a midterm where you have the voters hold them accountable?
Yeah, and then they become a little free once some of them get reelected, like a Susan Collins, for example. But at the end of the day, it troubles me so much to see that they are willing to abdicate the very thing that makes our country great. They are not willing to uphold the Constitution. They are not willing to live up to the oath they've taken. You can disagree with your Democrat counterparts, but at least fight for something. You're just simply abdicating everything, and especially in the House. And the House, I actually think they're happy they don't have to take a bad vote.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Susan, because in the House, I think that there's just a different calculation going on. I think about the fact that Speaker Johnson was one of the chief cheerleaders of Donald Trump during his, Stop the Steal movement. He was someone that, was on his podcast at the time talking about the fact that he was talking to the president every day at that point, challenging these ballots, right? He was a fringe character, and it's so interesting that now these fringe characters have become now they're mainstream. Mike Johnson is now somebody that's like, oh, everybody likes him. He's a nice guy, and I'm sure he is a nice gentleman, and I'm sure many people do like him, but his ideas are quite fringe. He is aligned with the Christian nationalist movement. So that's what's happening in the House. But in the Senate, I was just really struck by Thom Tillis. Thom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, right, who is up for re-election in 2026. North Carolina, very interesting place. Some days it's purple, some days it's red. And Thom Tillis, way back when Hegseth wasn't yet confirmed, Thom Tillis went to John Thune, the leader of the Senate majority, the Senate Republicans, and said, we have the votes. And Thune told Tillis, you got to take that up with the White House. And to me, it's kind of like, what do members do, particularly Republicans, if when they do garner the wherewithal and the courage to go to the leadership doesn't back them? If I'm Thom Tillis, I guess it's like, well, I'm on an island. What do I do now? And obviously, he ended up voting for Pete Hegseth. But I just couldn't imagine a Mitch McConnell leaving his members out there like that, telling them to go it alone with the White House because I'm not going to have your back. What do these members do? What recourse do they have if the leadership is not going to stand up for them and with them?
Well, in the case of Thom Tillis, let's not forget the first place when it came to distributing disaster aid that President Trump went to. He went to North Carolina. And I just don't think those things can be separated when it comes to Tillis's vote for confirmation for candidates and the aid that was promised and the visit the president made there. The thing that is just so shocking about Tillis and others is that they should know by now Donald Trump will leave them on the side of the road. If there's someone else better to back in a primary, he has no loyalty to Tillis. So whatever these Republicans are doing, they have even Trump won't continue to back them. And you can't count on leadership if you're looking to back away from Trump, because Thune is also going to go along. Now, to be fair, let's not forget Mitch McConnell, when he was in leadership, really went along to get along absolutely with Donald Trump. So there's no question in that. But leadership seems to be just such a horrible word to use it. Maybe he's just like the herder of members, because there's no leadership being demonstrated in either the House or the Senate by the majority.
I think all of that is so right on point, Susan, and it kind of draws me to a point as an example, Marco Rubio at the State Department. I've always looked at Donald Trump selecting him as a way to punk the hell out of him. Because this is a guy, I'm going to tell you why, because this is a guy who has a core. I've known Marco a long, long time. And this is a guy who always, as particularly in the Senate, fought very openly about the democracy piece and how important it was for the U.S. to use its soft power through agencies like USAID, for the U.S. to be on the front lines of confronting the aggression of our enemies, like China economically and Russia militarily. And here he is now at the State Department. And what does he have to do? He has to do what Donald Trump tells him to do those things that go exactly counter to what he's always stood for. I give you the New York Times, in which it notes the Bureau worked on enacting policies aimed at pressuring China to relent on its forced labor of Uyghur Muslims. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has long been a champion of policies that advance human rights and promote democratic practices. In the Senate, Rubio was a lead sponsor of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which had broad support from both parties in Congress. But now, here he is firing 60 contractors working on those very issues. Those issues are no longer a priority because they aren't a priority for this president. What do you make of this? I call it the punking of Republicans by Trump to get them to do the things that they know they would never do otherwise.
Well, they should have known going in, Michael, that they were going to have to bend to Donald Trump's will every single time. They are not there to be to inform and to advise. They are there to carry out orders. Frankly, I think he nominated a cabinet to make him 25th Amendment proof, if anything should really go by. That's what I think it's all about. it. So that way he had everyone falling in line behind him. So any values or core sense of policy that Marco Rubio or anybody has that went to work for Donald Trump, they can no longer do it because you have to carry out the orders. What's so interesting when we see someone like Marco Rubio, and this is what concerns me, is that we're seeing norm breaking and it's just happening. So when it happens at the next agency, oh, well, Marco Rubio did it. It's all of these things that are going to become normal and just accepted after a few times around the track. And that goes to the functioning of our democracy.
Susan Del Percio, thank you so much, Susan. It's good to have you on this morning.